It's that time again. The annual conference of the American Society of Ag Consultants, otherwise known as ASAC, is going to be held in Fort Myers, Florida, this November 4th and 5th. Kurt Covington is one of 9 professionals who will address the conference. The other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics represent Florida Farm Bureau, Florida Citrus Commission, University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, National Ag Law Center, Risk Mitigators and Advisors, Tyler Associates, as well as the lead economist for dairy at CoBank, and myself, Chrissy Wozniak from North American Ag. The day and a half of presentations will be followed by ag tours on Tuesday afternoon at Echo Farms, one of my favorite places here in Fort Myers. Attendees will experience farming at its most creative, with unique demonstrations, plants, and techniques being used to help farmers and urban gardeners in developing countries. A second tour at Echo will showcase simple technologies that can improve food, water, and shelter for millions of people. A third tour of a hydroponic grower is also being planned. For more information and to register, visit www.agconsultants.org. That's www.agconsultants.org. See you there. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Fastline Marketing Group. Fastline has been serving farmers and the ag industry for over 40 years and is in the name you can trust. Check out fastline.com for your latest equipment needs and fastlinemarketinggroup.com for their full suite of print and digital marketing capabilities. Fastline Marketing Group, the farmer resource and the marketing partner of choice for the agricultural community. Fastline.com. Welcome to North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. Today, we're starting something a little different here at North American Ag. My guest, American Agri-Women President Heather Hampton+Knodle, has agreed to join me approximately every 6 weeks or so to give us a rundown on the most important policy-related issues facing agriculture. Today, more than ever, we as the public have an almost impossible task of discerning the truth in our media, and this is really the whole reason why North American Ag exists. Having been in marketing my whole career, I've really grown to hate the manipulation of minds that happens in media and marketing industries. I crave the truth and I want to share the truth. And I want to take the murky water and help clear it so we can better understand what's going on. Because I'm not close enough to the issues on the ground, I reached out to Heather. And I know she shares my values and she loves our industry. She's closer to the issues than I am and has a much deeper knowledge of how ag policy works than I do. And her heart is backed up by her resume. She has a bachelor's degree in agriculture news with emphasis on geography and economics. She's been appointed by 4 governors to serve on the Illinois Governor's Rural Affairs Council and the Federal Communications Commission to serve on the Precision Agriculture Task Force. She's joined the Illinois Agri-Women chapter in 1995 and has served in many positions since then, including the Illinois Affiliate Secretary and President, Governmental Issues Chairman, Farm Bill Task Force Chairman, and Water Resources and Rural Development Chairman. And today we have a great topic: contradictions and conflicting goals in food and energy policy. From Fillmore, Illinois, I'd like to welcome President of American Agri-Women, Heather Hampton+Knodle. Welcome, Heather, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. And every time I hear that, and it starts to make me feel tired, so I'll pretend I just didn't hear that. Okay.
All right, you just forget that. Yeah. It's a great resume, and you know, you're, like I said, your heart is backed up by this. So and you're kind of my hero. So
oh gosh. Okay. Now we want to have a good interview. So thank you.
So first off, can you tell me a little bit about your background and your role with American Agri-Women?
Certainly. Well, my background is my husband and I farm with our 4 children in Montgomery County, Illinois, and Christian County, Illinois. We farm corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and we have Black Angus cattle. I grew up raising Black Angus cattle and walking beans in Shelby County, Illinois. So my journey with Agri-Women, you mentioned that I joined in 1995, and then I think my first stint as a national officer with American Agri-Women was in 2002. So that's kind of a lifetime ago for some people, like my children. But my journey with Agri-Women has led me into the leadership position now, serving on the executive committee and as their president, where we are working to continue to unite women in agriculture, educate ourselves on issues, talk with the public and with elected officials and regulators about why we do what we do and why it matters. So hopefully we can have common sense policies that protect everyone at the end of the day.
Wouldn't that be great?
It'd be so nice. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
And we also are investing in leadership development of women in agriculture. So whether they're from farms, ranches, or agribusiness, it's really an exciting and most of the time fun place to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you for your service in that area when you already have a busy life.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so, our 4 children are still very active in sport. Well, one is in college, but we try to stay in contact with each other regularly, and he's still helping with the farm and running his own water hauling business. And so there's always something going on, for sure.
I guess. So our topic today is contradictions and conflicting goals in food and energy policy. And this really resonates with me because it seems like the messaging we receive from every angle contradicts the one before and the one after. So why is this a topic that you want to cover?
Well, ultimately, it affects how we can deliver the best food, the best renewable energy, the best fiber, whether that's fiber for your clothing or fiber for building products. It is so important that we have policy making that understands how we can be self-sufficient as a country and ultimately become net exporters. It has been our agricultural industry that had kept us afloat for years, decades, in terms of a positive trade balance. And now we're seeing the tables turn on that. But it's so important, we think, as American Agri-Women and as farmers, to say, let us do what we do and let us do it well. But what we're receiving are a lot of policy decisions, in particular from the federal level, but it can become exacerbated at the state level.
Yeah.
But policy decisions that work in opposition to self-sufficiency. And I think the opportunity to visit about this, I can't thank you enough for being willing to discuss it in a little more depth. So it's not just one headline or a tweet, but we can actually explore it.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone, when I think of conflicting messages, there's one message in particular that really pops into my head. Everyone's heard this overused agriculture marketing message. We need to feed 10 billion people by 2050 using ag tech and AI with fewer resources. But then the next message is from the same companies is we need to leverage tech and AI to solve labor shortage issues. Okay, so we have billions more people, but fewer workers. That doesn't jive in my head. That equation, it just really, it doesn't make sense. And I know we could actually discuss this from so many different angles, and it affects a lot of different, policy issues. But of course, we need to embrace ag tech. Everyone who listens to this show knows that I love talking to those on the cutting edge of technology. It's fascinating. But what do you gather from contradictions like these when it comes to ag tech and AI?
Well, if you were to strip it down to its simplest form, I think that message that you're receiving on ag technology may not be as contradictory as what we might think if we view one of our limited resources being people in rural areas. So we're seeing that a continued out-migration, although in some areas, now that we've got more of a work from home environment, and if we are connected to the internet in a way where people can work from home, that's great. But so much of where ag technology is leading is we still require people with hands-on skills who are able to transfer what's in their mind through their hands to assist in deploying that technology. So my hunch is that these agricultural companies are saying one of our limited resources, besides just land and water, in order to feed people, are people with technical skills. So they're trying to create technology solutions to kind of hack that problem, so to speak. Where I see some contradictions, though, is maybe not so much from the big iron companies and the tech companies, but from the food companies, where they would set sustainability goals. And their sustainability goals are all, from what I've read, from what I've seen on the major players in this space, many of them are stated in terms of carbon footprint,
right,
or water usage, or reclaiming water in their process. Made some really noble and good ideas. But I have yet to see anything that looks at the social sustainability of rural communities and rural areas. And that to me is a huge contradiction, because we have to have people with skills, with knowledge, with the work ethic and the interest in producing food and fiber and actually truly renewable fuels that we can replicate year after year, season after season. We need those people.
Yeah.
And we need them to be living in communities with amenities that are safe and affordable and have access to the type of lifestyle that people would like anywhere they go. So I don't know if I specifically addressed your comment about that contradiction, because the need doesn't change. We still need to feed a lot of people, in a fairly short amount of time. But it can seem sometimes like, wait a second, but we have this labor shortage. Well, maybe it's the labor where we need it.
Right. Yeah. And it's
best
such a
chance of solving the problem.
Right. And it's such a good point, because the contradiction is also in immigration. And I feel like I can speak to this because I am an immigrant.
Yes.
And the help that comes from the federal level is, here's some money and an Xbox, not here's a community and here's some work. Right. And to me, that's a huge contradiction. I live in Florida, and immigrants are hard workers, like hard workers. And, that's just a huge contradiction to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what we've seen over time are contradictions, even in things like the H-2A policy to allow guest workers.
Yeah.
When we have food, I don't know what the statistic is, but we hear that people in the United States are still food insecure. So they either can't afford it or they may not have access to fresh and nutritious foods, for example. Okay. Even though we have record spending in government food programs to give money to people to be able to buy food, or have had for the last few years, and now that's being scaled back because it is not economically sustainable to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But the specific contradiction that I see is our policies, though, as it would relate to the hands needed to gather that food for harvest. I've heard of pear growers where they could not get, the federal government would not, it's not that they could not, they would not process visas quickly enough for the H-2A workers to come and harvest the pears. So the pears are rotting in the orchards. And it's not just pears. We've seen that you could probably pick almost any fresh food. Think of the salad bowl in California, Central Valley,
right,
and where you have migrant workers that may work across several different foods that many of us enjoy. And yet, because our federal government would not approve the visas and help people have a legal pathway to come and do something that earns them money, that helps their families, that also helps feed people, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Those to me are the most frustrating kind of issues, where you have people who know what they're doing, you have people who are ready to do the work, and we can't just get it done. And meanwhile, you have a federal system that has allowed and actually flown people who haven't gone through an H-2A visa process. They've flown them to communities in the United States and given them spending money in a hotel. And you're like, what? I just don't understand. It's not that I'm anti-immigration. It's just, why don't we work with the systems we have and make them work better?
Right.
And then try to seriously explore legal pathways to citizenship, because wouldn't it be wonderful?
Yeah.
If you could take advantage of this work ethic and this family and community ethic,
Right.
and help build our communities at the same time and continue to grow population. Because when you get to a stagnant or negative population growth, watch out. And the only thing that has kept the United States above like 2.85, I think, as far as growth rate, has been immigration, in particular from our southern border.
Right.
So it's all interconnected and never as cut and dry as someone may want to look at it.
Right. And like I said, I can speak to the immigration issue. We've been here almost 2 years, and my daughter is 16, turning 17, still can't get her license, still can't work, is not allowed to work. Luckily, my paperwork to be able to work came in last summer. And so I was able to move my company into the US, but my daughter still can't. Here's an able-bodied kid desperate to get a job and get her license.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. And it's definitely a broken system for sure. For the people that, that could benefit the United States, that could add something, and they're held back. So, we're lucky. I'm married to an American, so it's a much easier path for us, but still it's, this kid could have been working for, the last year at least, and adding something instead of, well, luckily she has 4-H, so she can keep herself busy in 4-H and sports. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs some common sense, like you said before.
Yes. And at the same time, do you see in your community, I don't want to assume that your community is just like ours, where almost every business, and definitely the fast food businesses, have for hire signs, hiring.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect entry level job for a teenager that teaches a lot of skills. I think some people may kind of look down at that or turn their nose at that, but there's a lot going on in those facilities. And there's a need. So let's match the willingness to the need. Right.
Yeah. And that just makes her angry when she sees all of the help wanted signs everywhere. Yes. And, the restaurant managers complaining they can't keep anybody. And she's like, oh, I just want to work so bad.
Yeah, I'll help you. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That has to be, that's just so, just the forced futility of it. That has to be so angering.
It sure is. Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, when we're seeing a lot of other countries and this massive shift in government policy regarding water conservation, especially nutrient runoff, places like Netherlands, Sri Lanka, and now Canada are passing some really aggressive policy in these areas. Why do American farmers need to pay attention to this, especially in the light of the new WOTUS rulings, which, here on Ag Spotlight, we address that issue frequently because there's just such an incredible impact. But what are you seeing, and what about from your point of view?
From my point of view, I've tried to be open to learning new information, new knowledge over time. But my basic point of view really has not changed in more than 20 years, because what concerns me is that regulatory agencies, depending on who a given administration is at a given time, in other words, what is their agenda? Right. What is their philosophical, fundamental point of view? And how many employees can they embed in the system, not as appointees, but deeper in the system? These are the realities that we have to deal with. But my concern is that there has, from my perspective, never been an adequate acknowledgement of baseline nutrient loading at the farm level, the field level. There are a lot of generalizations about point source and non-point source. And you could say X% of phosphorus loading comes from point source here and non-point source there, or X% of nitrogen, and so on. Break it down by nutrient or sediment loading, for example. Oftentimes, though, phosphorus is tied to soil. It's like its traveling buddy, okay? You're not going to see a whole lot of soluble phosphorus just floating around. So what we've seen in Illinois is a tremendous improvement in soil conservation, where our soil really likes to stick around compared to where it was in the 1960s, for example. I mean, this is a long-term process. This is not, we're going to change that in a week. That's the thing about agriculture and land management. It's not like a microwave. It's not instantaneous.
Yeah.
So the other thing is you're not creating more farmland anywhere in the world. You're not. You might take Cerrado in Brazil out of production, which is kind of like African savanna. If you think about it, we say it's rainforest, but really it's kind of savanna grazing land with termite hills and scrubby trees. So you may switch some land use, but overall, we don't have globally much opportunity for more arable, tillable land.
Right.
So specifically, it was interesting. I was on a call yesterday with a lot of researchers who are focused on artificial intelligence in farming and food for resilience. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of I'd put them in the category of super smart. I know that's not a very technical term, but they are just, out there in terms of how they figure out ways to quantify behavioral patterns in livestock, for example, and then translate it into an artificial intelligence software that could then inform veterinarians and herd managers and farmers and so on. And looking at soil sensors to look at carbon stocks and how the modeling plays out over time. So it's very, very in-depth, very extensive. But even in that discussion, I was able to point out to them, and it was a wonderful learning moment, I think, for them. And it felt rewarding for me to point out that nitrogen is a shapeshifter. So when I see countries like the Netherlands or Sri Lanka setting policy based on nitrogen, that to me is a huge red flag. And my concern is that I don't know what I haven't looked at their regulatory process, but my guess is their process also has not allowed for the many shapes that nitrogen can shift into and how it does that based on the soils that are there. So for example, in Illinois and in particular areas where you have a lot of high organic material in the soils themselves, think glaciers, hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago, multiple glaciers, leaving deposits, grinding things up, prairie in Illinois, Ukraine, these areas where you've had massive amounts of prairie grass over time that just grow and burn and grow and burn and wetland and pile up. That's a lot of organic matter.
Right.
So what happens is that starts to, and I'm not the soil chemist, but the gist of it is you get a lot of mineralization. So you get nitrogen released within the soil itself. It's not about what we control by applying. It is influenced by temperature and humidity and things that are out of our direct control. And it will go into waterways, into water sources with or without human beings.
Right.
So my concern is they're setting policy without looking at a natural baseline. And they're trying to hold human beings and human management accountable for all of it. And making any changes. And so besides being incredibly egocentric, it's not scientifically valid.
Right.
And that to me has just been, it's like, it's so wrong.
Yeah.
We can do better. And we do better. And we need to continue learning. But to just say, everybody stop, how does that make sense? When we still have people to feed? Especially in places like the Netherlands, where if anybody knows what they're doing in dairy production, it's those farmers.
Right. Yeah.
So if that, and we've had attempts in the United States of similar things, to regulate nutrients and set nutrient standards. Right now, for the most part, for most of the country, we are still in a voluntary nutrient reduction mode. But in Illinois, for example, we've shown massive reductions in the amount of nitrogen applied by farmers. And yet there's still nutrient loading in those streams. And the question becomes, then what? Because if we're not allowing for that baseline and we don't truly understand it, it's just a recipe for potential disaster unless everyone starts to say, whoa, don't talk to me in sound bites.
Yeah.
I want to find a real answer.
Yeah. So. Those are great points. And it feels like, just as you said, it's sound bites. And there's a theory in that community that we can control everything and we can't, right? It's like, the world is not a chessboard. Some people use it as a chessboard, but it's not. There is nature. I just survived a Category 5 hurricane when it hit, right? Like nature is a massive power, right? And we don't control all the chess pieces. And I think that is something we fight against, right?
Yes. And we need those capable managers on the ground. That's the other thing I'm kind of not struggling, but wondering where we're going to end up with the whole AI piece and agriculture. Just this morning, I had to unload a couple bags of feed for goats and horses out of the back of my car. Okay. And this little smart car sensed that I was on the slightest bit of incline. Now picture this, I'm still in our driveway next to a barn, and it won't let me go anywhere until I have my seatbelt on. I'm talking slightest, like 3 inches, maybe of gravel under the tire. And it's saying, you have to have your seatbelt on. I mean, it would not let go of the parking brake.
Really?
No, true story.
Oh my goodness.
Happened to me a couple times, and you think, whoa, guys, by the time if this were like a real situation where somebody's coming up behind me and I'm going to be rear-ended if I can't get out of here.
Right.
Not such a smart car in that moment.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, okay, so how do you take that little tiny example of it's trying to sense the environment around it? It has these cameras, so it shows all this whole backup 360 thing, but it doesn't seem to pick up people that are walking behind you. It's just It's crazy. Even with all the cameras, it's just not a foolproof system. But I'm wondering, how will this play out ultimately at the farming level, where we have now there's see and spray technology. We've not yet adopted that on our farm. But how do we work together in harmony and be able to override ultimately some recommended decisions that this technology may come up with? And you're like, whoa, no, really, in the moment, I can tell you based on 40 years of living out here, this is not the right move in the moment,
Yeah. So. Yeah. In the perfect world, that's the most incredible technology, right? The thought of it is amazing. And watching the demos while it's working are incredible. I do know how my Roomba gets in trouble every day. So I know people who listen all the time know I use that a lot. And, it can only get into so much trouble here, but released out into the world, there are a lot of variables for it to be making decisions for us. Right. So, yeah. So as long as I think we need to be slow at this, I think, not rush into it, but great points.
Be very intentional about how it informs decision-making, doesn't take over the decision-making. I think it needs to be a unified message.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And another topic along this line that has really been aggravating me lately in particular is the greenwashing trend just ripping across North America. It's so difficult to know what's real. It reminds me of the Hunger Games, real or not real, real or not real. Every time you consume some sort of media, and is it just a way of a company to make more money, or is it politicians raking in more votes on an issue they know is a trendy issue? I know we have a long way to go to be better stewards of the earth. I know that. I know we've sinned in the past and we need to move forward. But I also know that these issues are being exploited for personal gain. So I like to hear all sides. I often have people on either side to share their insight because I'm very curious, right? But could the resulting impacts of green energy incentives, what could those be if this goes on unchecked?
Just by way of background, okay, my senior year, most of my friends were guys, and we'd go out. And I remember driving back from the main town that we had to go to get like fast food or a milkshake or something. Okay. We're driving back, and one of the guys threw his milkshake thing out of the window, and it was winter time because there was still some snow on the ground. I stopped the car, drove back, and said, "Go pick it up," right? Because our approach, I think our generation was the first to be exposed in the United States anyway. There was this television advertisement, and it was this Native American Indian chief, and he had the tear running down his face because of all the trash and the landfills and the dumps that he would see along the roads. And that made such an impression. And we were the first, I think, to become indoctrinated. So what I'm trying to say is there's been this indoctrination over a couple generations, 3-4 generations now, to say we all need to be good stewards. And it's interesting because I'm not sure that some of us individually take that as seriously as now we're trying to say, and that's up to the corporations to take care of that. That's their problem because they're the ones at fault. So the corporations then, because there have been policy attempts by environmental organizations or the environmental industry, basically, to set rules and regulations that would require everybody to comply. Those didn't pass, so they took a backdoor approach, which was we'll approach the boards of directors or activist investors to help shape this in the corporate boardroom itself and in their hiring decisions. Okay, so that's a little bit harder than for the public to have a voice in that, to say, what should that look like? For example, this is a small example, but even convincing McDonald's to say, we want all of our eggs to come from chickens raised in a cage-free environment, or whatever it is. We're going to drive that through from an industry standpoint without actually realizing that you need specific cage sizes to prevent those birds from killing each other. Yeah. There's a lot of science that has gone into this on animal behavior.
Yeah.
So where did that go in that conversation?
Yeah.
That was going the humane route. But when it comes now to come to your question, if we look at things like ESG, environmental social governance, and corporations with their sustainability initiatives, now the play is how can we get the government to help us pay for this?
Right. Yeah.
And that's concerning for those of us who are at the ground level, literally making decisions about how land is used, and the ones who actually have to produce the product that becomes food that everybody sees in their in the grocery stores or the drive-through or wherever they consume from, convenience marts, wherever it is. It starts at the ground level. And the concern, we talked about this a little bit earlier, my concern is in their sustainability goals, there is no recognition of social sustainability in that. Right. And how do we keep able, responsible people on the ground raising food and in communities that are viable, right, in rural America to be able to get this done? Now, that question of how does the government pay for it, then that comes back to these greenwashing statements. So we have carbon offsets or carbon credit markets. So the financial sector has been driving some of that discussion, a lot of that discussion, and marketplace. Then there are also direct investment credits and or production credits for renewable energy projects. And I've not done any research lately, but I know for a time there were a large number of projects. I think of Harry Reid when he was senator from Nevada, and how I think it's been fairly well documented that some of those initial, called it green energy credits, were given to companies of some of his close friends, maybe even relatives, that then went bankrupt.
Wow.
Okay, so you have people pocketing that, walking away.
Yeah.
Now we're in a situation, we collectively, I'm thinking landowners, land users, where we have market factors that are increasing the price of land. So Central Illinois, there were about 500 acres just in our area that sold around October, November of 2022. The average price per acre, farmland, not development property, more than $16,000 an acre. As a farmer of corn and soybeans and wheat, it is really hard to figure out how that cash flows over a 30-year land loan.
Right.
So then you have pressures from, how do I make this land pay for itself? Well, here comes a green energy project saying, well, I'll pay you $1,000 an acre just to have a wind turbine here, or a solar, whatever, we're going to pay you something.
Yeah.
Then it becomes, now we need to look into the depth of those contracts. Is it only once it's active? Because it may take 10 years before you even do this. So why would I sign that lease? Or are you going to pay me that? And then in terms of the decommissioning process, we're seeing in Colorado now, where there've been wind turbines for 20 years, they've lived their lifespan. They've already had their blades switched out. And now those blades are in a graveyard, basically a landfill somewhere, taking up more farmland or land, period.
Right.
But the question is, who's going to remove this? When they said in the contract they'd take care of it, well, now they're bankrupt.
Yeah.
Or it was sold to 1, 2, 5 different companies along the way. And how do you restore land to a productive use after that? So there's so many concerns here, and the dollars are hard to walk away from.
Yeah.
When people are trying to figure out, how do I make things cash flow? Or quite frankly, you have more absentee landowners who are not actually farming, who said, I just want the money.
Right.
Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I can get $3,000 more a year. Yeah, I'll take that. Or 15 or whatever it is for their land. It's a hard place to be. And I don't have ready answers for it, but I think it's so important that people really understand the long-term impacts. To my knowledge, I just had a speaker last week, an attorney who's done more research on this than what I have, so I'm going to try to trust her on this, where she said solar cells, they've been around well over 20 years, actually closer to 40. So we still haven't figured out how to recycle that.
Wow.
And yet it has heavy metals and toxic materials in it. So how is that really, how is that sustainable in a long-term sense? And she mentioned she lived in the Virgin Islands and just survived a hurricane, and she'd seen a solar panel pierce concrete, go into the concrete wall.
Wow.
Which brought up another issue. Like, that was one where, well, we have tornadoes where we're at, where they want to put solar fields.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Nature can do a lot. Like we said, it's powerful. So what becomes your liability if that ends up in somebody's house, or worse yet, in somebody? Just all these issues that it's hard. Ultimately, we'll take individuals at an individual level, and it's their property. They need to make those decisions. But what's more concerning, though, is in the contradictory piece, is whenever states like in Illinois have now taken away the local control over the siting of these projects, and the state will accrue more money,
right?
Again, money, than any locals. And they can also give the company eminent domain, or at least on the transmission line process. So we have a lot of issues impacting land use and food production, both directly and indirectly.
Yeah. And I think we need to, refocus the lens and look back, take a step back and look at the whole picture, not just, which is really difficult as we as individuals want to care for our own family. Like you said, you can't judge somebody for, being in a rough spot and having to do something. I think that's where ag policy really comes in, where we need to be able to elect people who can see the big picture and can kind of get rid of some of these predatory things that are happening, especially with land. I had a conversation, I think just yesterday on Ag Fuse, with a bunch of people about this issue, about an interview I did a few weeks ago about land management and about the EPA and what happens when a conservation group comes in and says, I'm going to pay you this much money for your land. Well, you can't judge that person for selling if nobody wants to take over the farm, but now once that land is in the public domain, it's never coming back to farmland. Right. So it really reminds me, in immigrating from Canada and seeing the problems in Canada and coming to the US and just being, there's so much good here that needs to be preserved. And I see that. And one of those things that I've learned this year is that really the difference between democracy and a constitutional republic. And I think that we need to educate people into a democracy can buy votes just like that. A constitutional republic will actually preserve the rights of those people. And I just think I would love for people to really think about that we need leaders who are going to think not like a democracy, but like a constitutional republic. And I just feel that's so important.
And that becomes in itself a contradiction. I was just informed by, there are several measures right now at the state level to prevent adversarial actors. So those who've been defined by the Department of Defense to be adversaries of our country, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, okay, and Iran, and there might be one or two other countries on that list, but a fairly short list. They're saying several states have bills, maybe close to 20 right now, being debated to say we're going to prevent them from owning farmland or land in our state. And I don't know the details, like South Dakota proposal. I think the governor there was pushing for that type of bill. And the assembly of the same political party said no. Now, you think, well, why would they do that? Clearly, we need to prevent, somebody might say, we clearly need to prevent adversarial actors from owning farmland, because we've seen examples where a Chinese buyer, even though it was an individual, the Central Communist Party of China, CCP, will say, when any one of our country buys property, it's ours. It's not theirs. And it's right next to a military base in Texas. They had another proposal in North Dakota next to an Air Force base. Okay. Where they're going to put up basically like an ethanol or some sort of corn processing facility. And I think that just got nixed late January, first week of February by local government in that case. But the contradiction comes in that we also believe in private property rights, and that underpins our free enterprise system. Right? So when you have a willing seller who has come to terms that they agree upon with a buyer, it is their property. And so how do we, I don't have an easy answer for this, but how do you still preserve private property, which again underpins, is the foundation for free enterprise economics? Right. The idea that you can own that property, you have the rights to it, the use for it, you can choose to lease or not lease things out related to its use. How do we reconcile that with, there are these larger threats to the common good that they've stated? This isn't a what if scenario. You can actually find it documented, in particular in the CCP documentation in a publication by their war college, to say this is our agenda. Right. And it's to own you. So I don't have the answers, but I think making people more aware of that, because what concerns me and where I think states should play a role and the federal government should play a role, is to help people understand who's behind the contract. So you think you're doing business with a right-of-way company out of Houston, Texas, but actually they are representing another company that might be out of the Bahamas. It's actually representing an owner in Iran. Right. So how do you, I don't know how we can ever get transparency on that. Yeah. But without like impeding their rights. Yeah, you're right. I've never thought about it from this angle before, because it seems cut and dry when you just say it.
But you're right. There's a lot under the surface there.
There is. And it's like, again, it's not easy, but yet, because I am definitely about how do we preserve those individual rights. I think that's where United States really is unique,
right,
in our Bill of Rights and even the Constitution itself. But the fact that we set aside specific rights for individual and their liberties, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And it's more important that we protect those ultimately. It's really important that we protect those, because at the end of the day, if we want to have a voice, you've got to make sure that you can still speak.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. That's so true.
So,
what about the obvious contradiction of shutting down access to our own natural resources like minerals and oil? While I know this is a button.
Yeah, you just hit it.
But then our own administration cuts deals with other countries. So there's no, it's kind of like lose-lose, right?
Right. Okay. So here's an example that people may or may not be aware of. I think because so many of us, we're just trying to hold it together, right? You're just trying to wake up in the morning, be grateful you woke up, say thank you to God, say, what can I do by the end of the day that is, or in my mind, is pleasing to you, but also helps me get everything else done and just take care of my family, take care of my business, hold it together. So here's some background. Here's a very specific example. In late December, right around Christmas time, definitely by the first week of January, the U.S. presidential administration signed an agreement with a mine that's owned by the Chinese in Congo in Africa, to secure minerals, things like cobalt, that are needed for electric vehicles and battery production. Two major players in battery production, the United States and China.
Right.
So our presidential administration signed an agreement with them, and a member of the Congressional Western Caucus had stated that there are more than 40,000 children who work at that mine in the Congo. So I state that because some people who may support the current administration say, well, they support labor, they support unions, they support good jobs and good benefits. Okay, be aware that this was done. Okay.
Right.
Then within about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, before the end of January, the same presidential administration, through the Department of Interior and USDA Forest Service, placed a 20-year moratorium on mining in northeastern Minnesota, 225,000 acres, where our nation has more than half our reserves of nickel. Wow. And we also have, I think, platinum, cobalt. There are like two other mineral, copper.
Wow.
Which copper is not yet designated a critical mineral, but yet it is critical for meeting these green energy goals, like electric vehicle goals. It's also critical for things like our telecommunication products.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And what we effectively did as a country was just take that off the books. Mm-hmm. Here's the real kicker, without completing the environmental impact statement and all the requirements we say are due by law through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Mm-hmm. It just seems very arbitrary and capricious, and the timing does not seem coincidental. Right. And yet there was a company, Twin Metals Mining Project, that has already spent 10 years and more than $500 million, $500 million, in developing planning for the mining efforts in that area.
Wow.
So that's not something that I have seen. I really only subscribe to Wall Street Journal because I can barely, and our local newspapers.
Yeah.
Because I can barely get through. I mean, really, if you're Wall Street Journal, page B7, it's reference material at that point, right? It's archive. Who has time to read this?
Yeah.
I'd heard one time that like in the 1800s, the amount of knowledge a person would have in a year was the equivalent of like one issue of the New York Times.
Wow.
So think about how much information we have at us through how many different channels.
Right.
But I say that as a caveat that I've not seen this issue on any headline, at least in those front, the A and the B section over the last couple months. However, last fall, I think that Wall Street Journal, for example, had reported a similar situation where our government, which is behind on approving of offshore oil leases for development of oil, and even the 5-year plan to say we're going to be offering these leases like an auction, they're behind. They haven't met their timelines in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And somewhere I have the statistics on just how far behind they are. But at the same time, our government is not doing what it's supposed to do by law, but meaning the presidential administration through executive branch agencies, Interior in this case. At the same time, our presidential administration signed an agreement with Venezuela for oil.
Yeah.
Okay. What is happening?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that we don't have more, but you kind of said it though. I think our members of Congress, we're all so caught up in responding and reacting in the moment and trying to be that hero for 1 second, one tweet. It's not even 15 minutes anymore.
Right.
Right. It's living life at the rate of TikTok. Really? That we can't have a coordinated, well thought out response. Too many stones are flying too many different directions, and people are just trying not to get hit. They're just more interested in damage control.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I think just such a huge issue in all of this is, last week I was at a farm show and I hear producers saying to me, I don't pay attention to politics. I don't like politics, friends, family. I always end up bringing it up. That's just a weakness of mine, but I just can't pay attention to that. I'm not interested in that. Okay, but let's stop thinking of it as politics. Let's take things issue by issue. Right. And it doesn't take, there are resources out there where you can quickly see who supports the issue and what they're, that's just a Google search. Right. Or maybe a DuckDuckGo search, or, listen to a podcast or whatever. It's not that hard to just say, this issue affects me. Okay. How do people in my local government, my state government, my federal government, what are their views on this? And then think about politics that way, instead of like, I don't like this guy or I don't like that guy. Right. We have to start thinking about how these little decisions are adding up and really hurting. Right. There's no reason why we can't be producing our own energy. There's no reason why we can't. Why are we employing 40,000 children?
Yeah.
When people need jobs here.
Yeah. That's an interesting, I hear people say the same thing. We don't like politics, and I hate politics personally. I have friends who, to them, it's kind of like a game, and they're watching. It's almost like they should have trading cards like you do for sports, for athletes.
You're right.
And in my mind, people come and go, period. Now you can there are occasionally people who, that concept of built to last, who figure out how to create a system that can perpetuate itself, or an ideology that is just convincing enough to motivate people. Okay, so that's really is truly powerful.
Right.
But at the end of the day, people come and go. But what's really interesting, though, are the policies themselves. And how do we get to good policy?
Yeah.
There are a lot of the good news. There are a lot of think tanks. There are a lot of researchers who are trying to get there. The majority of them all start from some fundamental point of view And so a lot of are working toward essentially a confirmation bias. We want to back up our point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess is a lot of people, it just becomes too much. It's this idea of, well, what can I do? Yes, I know I can vote, and I can only vote on that candidate. And then I got to trust that they're just going to represent my best interest. And that's why it comes back to those people.
Yeah.
Short term. And a lot of times the people who we might ideologically align with, the reality is they're not going to be effective among their peers because they won't compromise on areas where it'd be okay to compromise. Like, okay, you want salt instead of pepper? Fine. I'm not going to stop you on that. But when it comes to these bigger issues that really impact liberties, true civil liberties, and impact our ultimate ability to be self-sustaining as a country, man, let's get on board. Let's be on the same page.
Yeah.
But it is a challenge, isn't it? It's just like, how do we empower people and give a way to plug in when no bill is perfect either?
Right.
That's the thing, is you want to say, well, you have organizations that'll send you this act now to support House Bill, whatever, 513. Which is a defense. Actually, that's a bill to amend the Defense Preparation Act of 1946 or something. But all we're trying to say here is that you need to, and I forget what it is. It's kind of like buy American and don't let adversarial countries do something else, right? Which seems kind of consistent with what we talked about. Yeah, but there is so much more at play. And I just think so many people just feel like helpless at the end of the day, or, well, that's what I elected them for. And right now it is pretty much a full-time job that they have to go out there, and I got to just trust them to represent me. Problem is whenever they don't realize what they're really doing.
Yes. Yeah. Or they have ulterior agendas
Exactly.
And that's what, we've talked about this before, about living, we're both faithful women, right? So we live with our faith, and our values are first. And what I feel has been the greatest travesty of the last century is that we've been convinced that we can't talk politics and religion in good company, or we're not polite. Those are the two things that affect us the most: policy, politics, and our faith. And we're not supposed to. So what I think is we need to be able to open up the table and say, we can talk about everything. And in a world that is saying we can't talk about anything, we need to be asking more questions than ever. What do you think? Is that a good first step?
Well, right here, I think this is why you and I we gravitate to each other. Yes, absolutely. I remember years ago, whenever I had the pleasure, the honor to be exec for the Upper Mississippi, Illinois, Missouri Rivers Association, I was asked to speak at a meeting with stakeholders on the river and a lot of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers employees, both the civil side and the military side. And I don't remember exactly where we were for that particular meeting, but I remember saying, we're not supposed to talk about politics or religion. So, but I'm up for both, and it's time that we stop governance by executive order, because at that time we were getting a lot of executive orders trying to say what we can do with waterways, what you can do with natural resources, similar to what we see now.
Yeah.
It really did. It got quite a chuckle in the room. And then my bosses, the board members who I worked for, like, well, we weren't quite ready for that, but we support you. It was kind of a gentle admonishment. Like, we're not sure we want to talk about this, so that's okay. I'll find other employment if you need me to.
Yeah.
But so it worked out.
That's awesome. So as listeners walk away from hearing this, what are a couple of steps then for them to start taking and being, brave and attentive?
Well, first, say thank you for even listening today. I'm amazed that people take the time to tune in and listen to the podcast, whether you're driving, doing chores, driving to work, taking your walk, preparing supper, whatever it is. It's just amazing. So that's a great first step right there, getting information. Second, you talked about Googling things. If people want to actually say, all right, I'm going to try to take the step and see what kind of bills are out there in Congress on a topic. So say you picked up on something like the foreign ownership, or you want to learn more about what are they doing to try to defend our rights on water quality or whatever it may be. A good place to start to actually look for the actual bills and legislation is congress.gov. So what that is it's the Library of Congress, the United States, and they catalog every bill that is introduced, and then what happens to it after it's introduced, what committee it goes to, how it's amended, and if it becomes law, then it lists, the final law. So you can look back throughout U.S. history and find a lot of information on congress.gov. So that's one thing if you're interested on the policy front. Mm-hmm. Another thing you could do if you really want to go active, you could look at American Agri-Women, for example. We just did a webinar on food security. A secure food supply equals national security. So we had some experts in supply chain logistics, in the military and legal nuance related to adversarial actors, and on the ground attorney. I mentioned the attorney from the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands. So you can find that through American Agri-Women's website and have access to those materials to learn more on that topic. Other agricultural organizations also have so much information available. If you're coming at it from an agriculture bent, and if you're a consumer, same thing. You can go to those same sites and learn a lot, glean a lot about things like Mexico and their GMO ban. And you wonder, well, why?
What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? And again, they've not provided any science behind it. It's very arbitrary. Then he comes back and says, well, okay, we'll let the GMOs come for our livestock, which is most of what they import.
Yeah.
Yellow corn, but we're not going to let the white corn in. Okay. Well, we have no nutritional proof about this. So what's up, Mexico? But you can find information out there. So I'd say those are two steps. And if you really want to go beyond that, then get some people together in your own community. Start having some conversations. Say, let's have a convening of like real conversation where we each just bring truth and pick a topic out of the hat and research it, and not come at it with, I'm going to try to hit you over the head with my opinion. And if you don't agree, you're evil. Yeah. But actually try to learn. That might be refreshing.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Just some ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, another thing to think about would be, when's the last time a governor or a president was elected with no political experience? Never. Right.
Well, Jesse Ventura in Minnesota, and that didn't turn out very well. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that they have to come from somewhere, which means we need to be engaged at a local level.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can strengthen these people who are running locally and help them flourish and then go up through the ranks, I think that's a really smart strategy.
It can be. I'm just thinking about our county board right now and the need. We've had a lot of turnover there, and they reduced their numbers. So it's, from when I was on the county board, it's a largely different set of people now and decision makers. And that's a really good point, just to try to have some conversations. And isn't that tricky though? Because sometimes when you do know people at the local level, you also know their personalities, and some are receptive. Many have an axe to grind. They run for one specific reason. Yeah. And is there an opportunity to visit with them about other reasons? You've just got to feel that out. Yeah. And just take the time, somehow find the time. Right. To try to get to know them.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So where can people find more about you and more about American Agri-Women?
Well, American Agri-Women's website is a really good start, and it's just American Agri-Women, all spelled out. That's AGRI women.org. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter, probably on Instagram too. I'm not, but yeah. There's our vice president of communications, and she has a small but mighty team that works with her.
Mhm.
They have a lot of information out there all the time. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Heather, so much. Great conversation. I am looking forward to the next one in a couple of months. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your insight.
Well, gosh, thank you for the time. It's an honor. Hopefully it's helpful.
Yes. And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, all the links are provided in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight on YouTube, Rumble, Telegram, AgFuse, whatever your favorite platform is. And the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Amazon, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And have a great day. Our newest podcast by North American Ag is called What Color is Your Tractor? The stories behind the ag brands you love and the ag brands you love to hate. Hosted by me, Chrissy Wozniak. We take a deep dive into the companies that have built modern agriculture. Subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. Go to whatcolorisyourtractor.com. Available on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.